What makes Mumbai tick are its railway connections and obviously the oldest railway line. And what makes Mumbai tick, or what really makes Mumbai visually the most amazing place, is all these amazing Victorian buildings and Art Deco buildings of South Mumbai. And I think it would be daft if a citizen of Mumbai didn't feel at some level connected to them. The very fact that this was the first great railway station, the very fact that as a public building, which is a railway station, it acquires the monumentality of a palace, was a very strong political statement by the British, that for them infrastructure is the new palaces of, and so it's from the royals and the princely rulers and the snake charmers. This was leading India towards modernity, and this was sort of a great ambitious plan of railways, and that it symbolizes that in every way possible. But having said that, it also is a beautiful amalgam of Victorian Neo-Gothic and Indo-Gothic. So it's really an amazing amalgam of European architectural ideas that came to India, were embraced by Indians and then reinterpreted. So you have, some of the spires actually look like temple forms, and you have within the filigree of stone that is part of the pierced panels, you have peacocks and you have snakes and you have mongooses and you have gargoyles. So it just is a rich, vivid imagery of symbols, of nature, of elements, and then again you have the busts of British, as well as Indians on the facade. So it's really, in a kind of sense, a marriage of two different cultures, a marriage of ideas, of East meets West, and it really stands for that sort of synthesis. I think these kind of buildings take longer to be restored than they were to be built in the first place, and it's just mind-boggling when you see the monumentality of these buildings and the fact that they didn't have machine tools at that time, and they didn't have JCBs and a whole lot of modern equipment, and yet they were built at such a rapid pace, and they were sourcing material from everywhere, and they were using local craftsmen and training craftsmen on site. And yet these buildings were built on time, within budget, and to such a remarkable degree of quality and finesse. It's something that you salute these builders, especially the 19th century master craftsmen and master architects of Bombay. For a city like Bombay, conservation has a very different meaning from, say, any other city in India. I have a very intimate relationship with historic buildings. So they're all in active use, and very vibrant active use. So you have the Victoria Terminus, which is a station where you have 1 million people coming in and out every day and sort of using it very actively. You have the Bombay High Court, which is sort of chock-a-block full with people, litigants, plaintiffs. So conservation in Mumbai is, in a sense, far more active because it's not only that you're conserving heritage for the sake of conserving heritage, but you're also, because you need to use those buildings, you need to make sure that they're workable. And I think that brings in a completely different and far more pragmatic view to conservation than something that's where you can afford to sit on an armchair, sit back, think, theoretize. I think in Mumbai we don't have that indulgence. We have to get going and look at conservation in a very active, constantly dynamic way. Well, structurally the building has been well maintained. So there are issues that the railways does look after its buildings, so they have a proper structural review and they do look after it, considering it's an old building. But there are also places where there is scope for improvement. I would just say that it needs to be holistic, it needs to be interactive, and it needs to make it needs to re-stitch the Victoria Terminus as an important urban marker back with the city, because currently that bit of that interface that happened through its central forecourt and its landscape has been lost, and if that could be restored, it would make for a better, urban interface with the city. I mean, if you have the Victoria Terminus, it's a World Heritage Site, but you can't say we'll just light it up beautifully and watch it. You've got, teeming people coming in and out. You need to look at visitor facilities, you need to look at risk issues, you need to look at security issues, you need to look at housing all those offices of the railways within the building. So there are many layered challenges that just are not limited to the building and its architecture, but also majorly towards its use, sometimes misuse and sometimes overuse. What really happened with the Victoria Terminus was that I think it's emblematic of a whole of a few decades in India where post-independence we didn't really have that, we didn't begin to think of historic buildings as being important, and there was maybe it was a fallout of the modern movement, but infills and alterations that were made over time were always knee-jerk reactions to a need, a necessity. So if they needed more space, a wonderful big hall would be compartmentalized and partitions initially in timber, and as the decades rolled by, they were replaced by plywood partitions, aluminum partitions. So we've had a whole lot of add-ons and infills into this historic building that have happened as a response to a certain use, and not necessarily with this sensitivity that we're looking at a beautiful heritage building. Similarly, we've had historic lights replaced by fluorescent tube lights, chocker blocks sort of hanging from the ceilings. We've had layers and layers of electrical wires and conduits crisscrossing over stone walls and arches. We've had toilets inserted where they probably were not. We've had verandas that were once open to let the breeze in, closed up and boarded because they needed a little extra space, so you block a veranda and park 2 office tables there and it gets used. So what's really happened over the last few decades is that incrementally changes have happened in a very small piecemeal approach. 7 or 8 years ago they did some sort of a stone cleaning of the facades, but yet the windows were not all restored, or the stained glass was not restored, or infill acrylic painted glass was not removed and leaded stained glass was not put in. Yes, the stone finials were replaced and done well, and Dutchman repair was used, but again the landscape was left out of the conservation plan and add-on infills were not removed. So what's really lacking in the case of the Victoria Terminus is a holistic budget allocation, a holistic sequential phase-wise plan of restoration that would address each one of these issues with a larger vision. So that's something that I hope will happen one day. There is currently a complete absence of a visitor interpretation plan. If you as a visitor, as either a tourist or a citizen of Mumbai or a commuter of the suburban railway station system, walk into the Victoria Terminus, other than the one plaque that says it's a World Heritage Site, there's very little information on the architecture, the history of the building, and even on interpreting different spaces as, okay, this is a historic ticketing office, and why was the color used or selected by the architect. The Railways does have an amazing archives of historic drawings by Frederick William Stevens. I wish they would be included in the signage panels so that people could actually look at these architectural drawings and understand how those spaces were designed. This is something that affects the largest number of citizens. I mean, one station where you have a footfall of more than 1 million per day is something that is definitely in the public domain and definitely something that impacts people. And the conservation of that building also should be something where citizens are made party to the discussion, at least the dialogue, if not the actual conservation process. Engagement is currently just limited to catching a train and alighting at the platform, and I think engagement needs to go beyond that for people to be able to come around maybe on Sundays or weekends and walk around different parts of the building. The building also needs to be more accessible to the public, other parts of the building other than the concourse, which it is, but the rest of the offices are sort of outside, and especially given the security and threats to this building. It's had a major terrorist strike during the 26/11 Bombay terror strikes. So there is this palpable threat of terrorism, but yet as a result of that, the average tourist or visitor gets denied that chance to walk through the central staircase and marvel at the domes, or look through the windows and see the stained glass, or see the beautiful patterns of Minton tiles that are there in the corridors of the building. So that aspect of the visitor experience becomes limited because of other issues like user and risk issues. Why CST is the same reason of why the Twin Towers in New York, because if a terrorist is hitting out at something, he wants to make it a great visual drama. The fact that you had two aircrafts found their way into the Twin Towers is not just about killing X number of people. It's about creating that visual image that would be spectacular and hideous and horrible at the same time and would shake the people. And therefore, had so many people been killed anywhere else, would have been equally a tragic loss and a great amount of human suffering. But when you want to hit out at an identity of a city, I imagine the terrorists want to really hit out at something that's a visual emblem of the city. And for that reason, we have both the Gateway of India and the Taj Hotel and the VT that were part of this horrific attack, because by doing that, at some way they were chipping at Mumbai's identity, chipping at Mumbai's favorite places or iconic landmarks, and in that sense trying to inflict damage not only on the number of human casualties but also inflict damage on our psyche, on the psyche of the city or the average Mumbaikar. This is the bloodline of Mumbai. You stop the circulation of Mumbai by cutting off an artery. So we had no choice as the city to just get back and have the trains functioning as soon as one found it was possible, and that is the reason it was back to being functional. The problem lies with the fact that you've got different agencies looking at different aspects of the fort area. So while the railways is the major stakeholder and it owns the building, issues such as hawkers and all that are looked at by its neighbor, the municipal corporation. And there needs to be a greater dialogue between the railways and the BMC to actually work out an amenable way of accepting the kinetic city and yet making sure that it doesn't engulf it and in any way threaten its integrity and its historic authenticity. And for that reason, I think there needs to be a greater thinking. I mean, when you now think that you not only have the road and the way you've got the hawkers streaming, but you also have a metro, underground metro line 3 that is proposed, how are we able to look at user connections, at transportation links, at underground links between the metro and the railway? Could somebody take the metro line and get onto the to catch a train to go to Aurangabad, or would it not match? Would you have underground pedestrian linkages and therefore be able to remove those caterpillar sort of additions that have been highly criticized by citizens, which were subways? So all this is something that needs a lot more thinking and a lot more interaction between various agencies, whether it's MMRDA, BMC and railways. How much of name changes are actually political gimmicks and how much of name changes are something that citizens demand? I mean, a case in point is the fact that to this day, you get onto a cab and say, Kala Ghoda leke jao, and it brings you to the place where once an equestrian statue stood and hasn't been there for entire living memory of people. It just shows how names can continue in history longer and sometimes are more evocative than even tangible structures. and therefore while people do call it CST, there are enough people who still call it VT. I think CST was designed to be a railway station, it continues to be a railway station. So unless there's a major change in suburban lines or that, this is one building which will continue to be extremely relevant into contemporary society and extremely relevant to the average citizen of Mumbai. So in that sense, I don't see it as being changed of milestones. What I would see is, yes, perhaps with, you know, what one hears about and reads about, these sort of mega schemes of what is the railway is going to do with their lands on P. de Mello Road. Maybe those kind of things will change or make it a different aspect or bring in a different aspect to the railway station if they add, you know, hotels and other facilities, or you know, its engagement with the eastern waterfront. So without that, I think this is one building ever since the time of its commission to date, it remains equally important with no major shifts in its usage or its significance as such.